This is the Royal Report.
Good evening and welcome to the Royal Report. I'm Caroline DeRusso and we are back to our usual scheduled time. Here's what we've got coming up on the show. Prince Harry and Prince Andrew have lost even more royal roles. We'll tell you what they are and why they lost them. Prince Harry drops his libel case against Associated Newspapers. Esther Kraku joins us from London with the latest. And King Charles holds the Spy Oscars, secretly awarding members of the intelligence community. But before we get to all that, let me bring you all back up to date on the Windsors. We have been, rightly so, sidetracked with the Danish Proclamation over the last couple of weeks. But as always, there has still been plenty of British royals news bubbling away in the background. So the new official portrait for King Charles has been released. Then Elizabeth Debicki, Australian, won a Golden Globe for her portrayal of Princess Diana in the series The Crown. Meghan and Harry weren't invited to the Golden Globes, but they were ridiculed by comedian Joe Coy in his speech. Here you go.
Turns out Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will still get paid millions of dollars for doing absolutely nothing. And that's just by Netflix.
Zara and Mike were all loved up on holiday in Byron Bay. The Princess of Wales marked her 42nd birthday. Harry dropped his libel case against Associated Newspapers. Meanwhile, he was dropped as a Councillor of the State, as was Andrew. And then the Princess of Wales was admitted to hospital for abdominal surgery and is currently still in hospital. The Prince of Wales has reduced his workload to take care of his wife. The King has been diagnosed with an enlarged prostate and is currently taking rest at Sandringham before his upcoming surgery. And the Queen has cancelled key events in London in the lead up to the King's surgery. All the while, the rest of the royal family is rushing to cover bases so that royal engagements are attended and responsibilities are attended to. It really has caught everyone on the back foot and makes you query whether a slimmed-down royal family can manage in the event of unforeseen circumstances such as this. Now, it's also been a year since we first launched this show. In our first show, we covered Prince Harry's then brand new memoir, Spare. Well, that seems like a lifetime ago. And while a lot has happened in the last fortnight, the mind absolutely boggles at what has happened in a year. And the royal roller coaster continues into 2024, totally unabated. Joining us now is royal commentator Angela Mollard and News Corp columnist Louise Roberts. Ladies, welcome. Angela, it's been reported this week that King Charles will be requiring surgery and the Queen is, of course, playing an important support role. What's the latest?
That's right, Caroline. We heard that news earlier in the week, of course, 90 minutes after news of the Princess of Wales. What's happened in the last little while? On Friday, the King and Queen flew to Sandringham from Scotland. They arrived there. The Queen the day before had done, as she'd had an engagement where she was asked about the King's health. She said that he just wanted to get it done and to get on with business as usual. We don't know what day, what hospital the surgery is going to take place, but at some time this week, there will be a surgeon somewhere trying to get a good night's sleep.
Absolutely. And Louise, as Angela alluded to, similarly, the Princess of Wales has had surgery and remains in hospital. Can you update us on this?
Yes, so she had abdominal surgery in a private clinic in London. She's expected to stay there for at least the next 10 days, if not 2 weeks. And then she's got a quite lengthy recuperation at home with the family, up to 3 months, which will kind of take her out of action for royal engagements until after Easter. And it has created a bit of a situation because obviously with the King himself unwell and about to have surgery, the expectation would be for William to step up, of course, but he has to put his own family and his own wife first as well. So it's created this sort of vacuum of availability at the very top of the firm.
Now, Angela, before we move on, there has been some commentary this week that the royal family has been more open than usual about these health matters. What has been the approach in the past?
In the past, a long way back, we got no information. For instance, when the Queen was pregnant, we were never told that she was pregnant. We were only told, the public were only told that she would not be fulfilling duties until, 6 months down the track. So there was never any knowledge about it. I think where things have changed was in 2021, the Queen went into hospital, but Buckingham Palace didn't actually say she had. They had briefed a newspaper saying that she was not particularly well, was having some rest, and there was a lot of consternation at that stage that they weren't being as transparent as they could be. Now, of course, in recent times, we've seen great transparency from people like Fergie. Before that, of course, the Princess of Wales talked about having morning sickness. We now have the King and the Princess of Wales being more transparent about their health. We used to have things like the Duke of Edinburgh would have an infection, but there would be no specifics around it or no knowledge of how ill he was. I don't know whether on this occasion we will actually find out what particular surgery Kate has undergone, but I think we will get updates, and when the King has his surgery, we'll certainly get updates. I think there's also an interest in broadcasting conditions that can prompt the public to take better care of their own health. The NHS has reported that they've had an 11-fold increase in searches on their website on prostate cancer as a result of the King's announcement.
Well, if it does bring awareness, then that is an absolutely wonderful thing. Now, Louise, with both the King and the Princess of Wales being out of action at the same time, it has exposed this weakness, I suppose you would say, in this new slimmed-down royal family. That hasn't gone unnoticed, has it?
No, it certainly hasn't. In fact, it's been one of the dominating points of conversation around this whole issue with the two of them needing medical treatment. And something that Princess Anne, of course, herself raised, that in his efforts to have a slimmed-down monarchy, i.e. not spend as much money and not be as elaborate as previously, it does create a bit of a power vacuum at the top when you've got the three most senior royals kind of out of action, as it were. And we've got Princess Anne and Prince Edward, of course, and Sophie, who are working royals, but their diary is full. I mean, it'd be interesting to see how much of, say, Kate and William's duties they can take on board when their own sort of schedule would be pretty chockers, I would think, as well. And of course, Queen Camilla is doing her best in her usual never complain, never explain sort of way that she goes about things as well. So I do think it'll be quite interesting to see how this affects sort of Harry and Meghan as well. I mean, obviously the thing to do would have been for Harry not to go to that awards ceremony in Beverly Hills this week and say, I'm sorry, but my family comes first. I don't really want to be a legend of aviation. I'd rather go back and make sure my father's okay and my sister-in-law and in fact my brother. But of course he stayed in Beverly Hills. But really in the current state, I don't think Charles expected that a slimmed-down monarchy would mean that all three of them would be off duty, and in fact his youngest son wouldn't be part of the picture either.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And Angela, how do the royal family fill the gaps for now? And how do they plan for this potential circumstance in the future?
Yeah, look, it's really problematic, as Louise has pointed out. They do have councillors of state. The problem in the councillors of state, what their jobs are, and after the Queen died, certain members of the royal family moved up. These councillors of state can step in for the monarch if required. The problem is that Andrew and Harry are both councillors of state. Obviously, they cannot do the work. So just very quietly, Anne and Edward were both appointed councillors of state. Princess Beatrice is also a councillor of state. Now, she could take on this role, but the problem at the moment is that non-working royals cannot assume these roles at the moment. It all sounds very complicated, but basically, as Louise said, it means there is a vacuum. I think very much that the King would be thinking, that he really does need Harry and Meghan at this stage, because we're not just talking about Britain, we're talking about the Commonwealth. And if there's this period of recovery for both of them, those overseas trips are the things that they could be doing. That said, I wrote a piece for the UK publication, 3,000 comments on it. I'd have said 2,999 of British people said, don't worry, we don't want him back. And his brother and his father probably don't either. So very interesting, the point of view from the UK.
Yeah, that is absolutely interesting. Now, Louise, we understand the Sussexes found out about these health issues on the news. It really does show how wide the gap is between them all.
Absolutely. I think the priority was to sort of assuage any concern from the public about the state of King Charles and what it really meant. Of course, the prostate situation is a benign one, which is good. And I guess the time difference, they had transplanted themselves to the US. So given the time difference and the expediency at which the royal household decided to tell everyone that King was going into hospital, it meant that probably Harry did find out on a news flash rather than any kind of private message. I think the news landed in Los Angeles time about 7:20 a.m. in the morning. So, you know, obviously he's not talking to his brother, and he couldn't speak to Kate because she's in hospital, and not that he's talking to her anyway. So I do feel that gulf is more massive than ever as well. And if you are going to transplant yourself and, you know, pour a bucket load on your family, how can you expect to be told about these things, really?
And Angela, I think that's right. Had circumstances been different, this would have been the perfect opportunity. You know, from what you said just before, obviously the Britons don't want Harry and Meghan back, but it seems unlikely that he would take the positive step, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Apparently he has, one of the newspapers in Britain is reporting that he has reached out in different methods to his father and sister-in-law. I don't know. And look, I hope we don't know what he said, to be honest. There's so much publicised from the Sussexes that I think anything private is a good sign, because the fact is, if Harry does visit, then he has more information, and we know that he is a leak for information. That's a massive problem for the royal family. So that trust issue is so pertinent in terms of how they manage this relationship going forward. But it is an opportunity for Harry to take attention away from himself and to put the attention back on other members of the family.
Now, Louise, we found out this week that the King hosts an annual secret awards night for MI5 spies. Now, for me, that is just too good to be true. Can you tell us what this is about?
Isn't it a great story? I love this story. Apparently he does host the Spy Oscars, which has been going since 2012. Who knew? Well, of course, none of us, because it's all very secretive, such is the nature of being a spy in the UK and probably anywhere else in the world. But it's an opportunity at the MI5 Awards for those who work in the shadows, who are stopping terror attacks and huge drug industries and so forth, and protecting Brits and probably by virtue the rest of kind of the Western world as well. And they're actually getting some recognition for that work. They're not the sort of people who can go to the palace and get an OBE or an MBE from the King, because their work is so secretive. They literally have to stay in the shadows. But it's great to see they are being recognised for their great work, and not just the spies per se, but also the whole support network, the people who do the catering, the interpreters and everything. And I just love this story. I think it's fantastic that Charles has immersed himself in that world, and wouldn't that be a great dinner to go to? Can you imagine the stories? It would just be fascinating.
I think it's absolutely fabulous. Now, last Sunday we were tuned into the Danish Proclamation, very different from the royal coronation last year, and probably a bit more akin to Charles' ascension to the throne after the Queen passed away. While it was more subtle, it wasn't without its memorable moments. And the footage of Queen Margrethe signing her abdication papers and then leaving the room, I found incredibly moving. Angela, what a moment.
It was a moment, wasn't it, Caroline? I'm with you on that one. I think it's because we don't generally see monarchs abdicate anymore. They tend to die, and their heir takes the space. So to see the simplicity of this as well, I think after seeing the King's coronation, the British King's coronation, just the previous year, with all the pomp and splendour of that, to see this woman dressed very simply, her son, her grandson, and then to turn away and just to walk out that door, even with the new King Christian, his back to his mother. It's a reminder that, that people, when they move away from these roles, they have given so much of themselves, so much duty, so much service. And I think what is exciting, though, is to think of the Queen's trust in Princess Mary, now Queen Mary, and the fact that she feels very secure in passing that job on to, obviously, someone who's come from our shores.
It was absolutely divine to watch. Angela Mollard, Louise Roberts, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up next, Prince Harry has dropped his libel case against the Associated Newspapers. Esther Cracker will join us from London to explain why. Welcome back to the show. Joining us now is writer and broadcaster Esther Cracker. Esther, we understand Harry has dropped his libel case against the Associated Newspapers. Can you tell us what happened and why?
Well, it came as quite a shock, actually, because the day that his legal team was supposed to submit evidence, it was revealed that he was dropping the case against the publishers of the Mail on Sunday for that article that was written in February 2022, which he claims was libelous against him. It was regards to his fight for his armed security with the Home Office. Now, we remember that a few weeks ago, the judge actually ruled that the Associated Newspapers Group can actually use the defense of honest opinion moving forward in the trial. But he for some reason has decided to randomly drop the case, and it's alleged that he's going to be footing the bill of about £750,000. So £250,000 of that is actually the legal bill for Associated Newspapers for even going ahead with this sort of court case in the first place, and then the rest of his legal team. We don't understand why. Obviously, he's not dropping the other cases against other newspaper groups for phone hacking and other claims of unlawful information gathering, but he has randomly dropped this case. He's still moving forward with his case against the Home Office to try and reinstate his armed security. He's still keeping on that fight and saying that he is wholly dedicated to trying to protect his family. But for some reason, this libelous case has been dropped. Now, one thing that was interesting that his legal team did claim with this case was that it actually defamed him and it damaged his reputation as an honest person. That's a very interesting claim, and it's interesting that he's not willing to defend that any further, but I suspect it has something to do with the fact that it looked like he wasn't going to win that case, and it would have just been a waste of his time and money.
Also reported this week are claims that the Queen was angered by Harry and Meghan, calling their daughter Libel. Now, how has this come to light now, and are you surprised at all that the Queen was upset about this?
Yeah, so this story is quite an interesting one because obviously the Queen is not alive to speak for herself, but these are claims that have arisen from King Charles's latest biography written by Robert Hardman, stating that the Queen was actually very angry. So apparently, courtiers that were close to the Queen said that she'd been as angry as they'd ever seen her over the fact that Harry and Meghan chose to name their second child, their daughter Lilibet. Now, I suspect it wasn't the fact that they chose that name for their daughter, but I think it was the way that it was done. So immediately after it was revealed that Harry and Meghan's second child was going to be called Lilibet, Harry and Meghan's PR team basically released a statement to the BBC and other media outlets here in the UK that actually that Harry had got explicit consent from the Queen. And the reason why I suspect they put out this statement is because everyone knows that Lilibet is a nickname for the late Queen because she wasn't able to say her name as a child, so she called herself Lilibet. And it's a close nickname that only members of her own family, her husband, her sister, the late Queen, Princess Margaret, used for her. But the problem is the Buckingham Palace refused to corroborate that story, and actually there was a bit of a kind of tension between Harry and Meghan's team and Buckingham Palace because the palace refused to say actually yes, the Queen has given explicit consent. And I think it was the potential fallout from that stressed out the Queen because it's not something that she was interested in dealing with. She wasn't interested in kind of developing a media tit for tat for the sake of Harry and Meghan saving face and saying actually the Queen gave her consent. I do suspect though that the Queen may not have necessarily consented in the way that Harry thinks she did. Because we know that the royal family are very traditional, and if she was happy to go ahead with this, or if she was happy for their daughter to have her nickname, which is something that only close friends and family call her, I think there would have been something written there. There would have been written evidence, and Harry and Meghan's team can say, look, the Queen says this is fine. Not that they necessarily have to ask her for permission, because it is a name and she doesn't own the name, but it is, courteous and something that respectful people would do, particularly when you are of the notoriety of the Queen. I don't know if the words that the Queen allegedly used are accurate. It doesn't sound very much like her, but it's also quite foreign and unusual to hear direct words from the Queen that she hasn't uttered in a speech or anything like that, because we know that the Queen was very private and she was very discerning in the kinds of things that she said. But I do suspect that it was actually the kind of potential media fallout and the head-to-head between Buckingham Palace and Harry and Meghan's team refusing to corroborate stories and all of that. That's probably what the Queen was unhappy about.
Now, Harry and Andrew, they've also recently been replaced as Councilors of the State. This was all done very quietly. What does that mean, and who replaces them?
So the Councilors of State bill that was submitted last year for the year 2022-2023, just after the King's accession, actually had a small amendment that has recently been discovered, which basically states that only working royal members of the royal family can become Councilors of State. And now it's become particularly relevant because the King is taking time off to have surgery for a routine procedure, but he is still going to be able to fulfill his constitutional role as head of state, just not the ceremonial ones of, charities and going to events and all of that. But because of that small amendment of working royals, that effectively disqualifies Prince Andrew, certainly, who I still think should be banished to Goa, and Prince Harry and Princess Beatrice, who's not a working member of the royal family. So, traditionally, Councillors of State have been the spouse of the monarch and then the next four in line to the throne over the age of 21, which, of course, nullifies Prince William's children. But adding the working royal stipulation, that effectively nullifies Harry and Prince Andrew, who are technically still Councillors of State, but actually not eligible to carry out the role.
Now, the recent illnesses of both the King and the Princess of Wales illustrate just how important these roles are. Are there enough members of the royal family to fill the void?
It seems so. I mean, we have to remember that the King is not going to be off for very long. This is a very routine procedure for an enlarged prostate, which is a very common condition. I mean, 90% of men over the age of 80 suffer from it. So if you're a man and you happen to live that long, it is likely that you will undergo this procedure. So it's just the King, one senior member of the royal family that will be off for at least a few weeks. It's Princess Catherine who's going to be off until at least Easter. And obviously because of that, Prince William is going to take some time off as well, just to be there for her and their children. He's likely to take on some of her engagements between now and that time. And there unfortunately have been speculations that Harry could have stepped in if he and Meghan were still in the royal family, but that ship has sailed. But they're going to work around it. I mean, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh are still taking on a lot of roles, and Princess Anne, who shows no signs of slowing down. Last year she was the hardest working royal with the most royal engagements for 2023. So it looks like they're just going to shuffle their calendars and somehow make it work. But obviously this does remind us that there are fewer members of the royal family, working members of the royal family, to carry out their duties, and someone like Prince Andrew is completely out of the picture, rightly so.
Esther Krakow, excellent observations as usual. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, just before we finish up, the formalities surrounding the royal family can often appear a little cold and a little distant. But how adorable is this video of the royal guards inspecting this excited child in his miniature uniform?
Good evening, young man. How are you? Good? You look very smart today. Culture guards, though. Quite Scots guards. Your shoes looking lovely and as well, actually.
But it gets better. They let him join in their march. And that's the show for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Up next is Newsnight. Good night, and we'll see you next week.